Your child has been given a brand new toy. You spent real money on it. They unwrapped it with the kind of excitement that made you feel like you got it exactly right. And 40 minutes later, they are standing in front of you telling you they are bored. Not bored of the toy. Just bored. Completely, totally, dramatically bored. Like the universe itself has run out of things to offer them. You feel a flicker of irritation. Maybe more than a flicker. Because you are looking around a room full of things, toys, books, games, a screen they have access to, and your child is telling you there is nothing to do. It does not make sense. And if you have ever wondered whether your child is just being difficult, or ungrateful, or simply wired wrong, here is what no one ever tells you. The boredom is not a complaint. It is a signal. And what it is signaling is one of the most sophisticated processes in the developing human brain. To understand what is actually happening when a child gets bored, you need to understand something about how the brain manages its own energy. Because the brain does not run at full power all the time. It cannot. It is the most metabolically expensive organ in the human body, consuming roughly 20% of your total energy even though it makes up only 2% of your body weight. Running it at full capacity continuously would burn through resources faster than the body could supply them. So the brain has a system. It is called the default mode network. And it is one of the most important and least understood systems in all of neuroscience. The default mode network is a collection of brain regions that become active when you are not focused on any specific external task. When you are not reading, not solving a problem, not reacting to something in front of you. It activates during what looks, from the outside, like doing nothing. Daydreaming. Wandering thoughts. Staring at the ceiling. Sitting in the back seat of a car watching trees go past. For a long time, neuroscientists assumed this network was simply the brain idling. Background noise. Not worth studying. But beginning in the early 2000s, researchers started to realize something extraordinary. The default mode network is not idle. It is extraordinarily active. In many ways it is doing some of the most important cognitive work the brain ever performs. Dr. Marcus Raichle, a neurologist at Washington University who first mapped the default mode network in detail, described the discovery as one of the most surprising findings in modern brain imaging. The brain, he found, uses more energy during rest than during most focused tasks. The default mode network is not switching off. It is switching on. But what is it doing? What is the brain actually working on when a child is sitting there, apparently doing nothing, telling you they are bored? It is doing several things at once. It is consolidating memories, taking experiences from the recent past and quietly filing them into long-term storage. It is running simulations of the future, imagining possible scenarios, rehearsing social interactions, working through problems that have not been consciously identified yet. It is building connections between unrelated ideas. It is constructing what psychologists call the narrative self, the ongoing story a person tells about who they are, what they want, and where they are going. In a child's brain, all of this work is happening on an accelerated and enormously intensive scale. Because a child's brain is not just maintaining a self. It is building one from scratch. Dr. Helen Immordino-Yang, a neuroscientist and professor at the University of Southern California, has spent years studying what happens inside children's brains during rest and inward-focused thought. Her research shows that the development of the self, of moral reasoning, of emotional depth, of the capacity for empathy and imagination, all of it depends critically on periods of unstructured mental rest. The kind of rest that looks, from the outside, exactly like boredom. When a child says they are bored, their brain is often in the early stages of activating this network. The discomfort of boredom is the signal that the external world has stopped providing enough stimulation to keep the focused attention system running. And the brain is now switching over. Asking the child to wait. Asking them to sit with the discomfort while the default mode network spins up and takes over. The problem is that the transition feels terrible. Boredom is genuinely unpleasant. It is not a neutral state. It produces a low level of psychological distress that researchers describe as a combination of frustration, restlessness, and a sense that time is moving too slowly. Dr. Sandi Mann, a psychologist at the University of Central Lancashire who has studied boredom extensively, describes it as the brain's way of signaling that the current situation is not providing the kind of stimulation it needs to grow. It is not a sign of laziness. It is a motivational state. A push. And children feel it more intensely than adults for a very specific reason. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for tolerating discomfort, delaying gratification, and sitting with unpleasant feelings without immediately acting on them, is not fully developed until the mid-20s. A child's capacity to endure the discomfort of boredom without immediately seeking relief is genuinely lower than an adult's. Not because they are weak or spoiled. Because they are neurologically younger. This matters enormously for what happens when you immediately resolve a child's boredom for them. When you hand them a screen the moment they say they have nothing to do, you are solving the symptom and erasing the signal. The discomfort disappears. The default mode network does not get the chance to activate. The internal work does not happen. Research by Dr. Teresa Belton at the University of East Anglia on boredom and creativity found that children who were allowed to experience boredom, and were not immediately rescued from it, consistently produced more creative, more original, and more internally motivated responses to open-ended tasks. The boredom, when it was allowed to run its course, functioned as a kind of ignition. The discomfort forced the brain to generate its own stimulation. And what the brain generated, when left to its own devices, was frequently remarkable. This is not an argument for withholding things from children or manufacturing suffering. It is something more specific. It is the recognition that boredom is a transition state. A doorway. And that the most valuable thing a child can develop is the ability to pass through that doorway without panicking, without immediately reaching for external relief, without needing someone else to fill the space. Because on the other side of that doorway is something that modern life makes increasingly hard to find. The kind of thought that only happens when nothing is happening. The daydream that becomes an idea. The idle afternoon that becomes a game. The empty hour that becomes the thing they talk about for years afterward. Think about your own most creative ideas. Think about where you were when they arrived. Almost certainly not in front of a screen. Almost certainly not in a meeting or in the middle of a task. They arrived in the shower. On a walk. Staring out a window on a train. In the borderland between sleep and waking. These are all states where the default mode network is running. Where the brain is given space to connect things that do not usually connect. Your child has this capacity too. An enormous, almost reckless version of it. A child's default mode network is not just active during rest. It is hyperactive. It is building faster, connecting more widely, generating more freely than it ever will again in their life. The daydreaming of childhood is not wasted time. It is arguably the most productive time in a human life, measured by the sheer volume of neural architecture being constructed. Dr. Stuart Brown, a psychiatrist and founder of the National Institute for Play, has documented across decades of research what happens when children are denied unstructured time, when every hour is scheduled, when boredom is treated as a problem to be solved rather than a state to be experienced. The results are consistent. Reduced creativity. Reduced resilience. Reduced capacity to self-regulate and to self-direct. Children who are never bored struggle, later, to know what they want. They have not had enough practice generating their own direction from nothing. So what do you do when your child is standing in front of you, dramatically, completely bored? You do not panic. You do not immediately fix it. You can acknowledge that the feeling is real and that it is uncomfortable. You can say that boredom means their brain is looking for something and that you trust them to find it. And then you can wait. Not indefinitely. Not without warmth. But wait. Because the research is consistent on what happens when children are left to find their way through boredom without immediate rescue. They find things. They invent things. They create games from nothing, worlds from the corner of a room, entire narratives from a pile of sticks or a patch of backyard. This is not nostalgia. This is neuroscience. The brain, when it is not being fed, learns to feed itself. And that capacity, to generate meaning and engagement from within, rather than waiting for it to arrive from outside, is one of the most important capacities a human being can develop. Your child is bored. Their brain is ready. The doorway is open.